Hello YouTubers out there, this is Jerry Saravia at the movies. So today we're reviewing Oliver Stone's new documentary, JFK Revisited, Through the Looking Glass. And this is basically an extension of his 1991 film, very controversial, probably the most controversial film Oliver Stone has ever made aside from Natural Born Killers. And it's based, of course, on the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And these are records, newly released records and documents based on the 1992 JFK Records Act, which was put together mainly because of Oliver Stone's film that led to this. And these are documents that come from the Church Committee from 1975, in addition to the House Select Assassinations Committee and the Assassination Records Review Board at the National Archives. So you can see a lot of these documents. I shouldn't fail to mention that I'm sure a lot of this is redacted and some of it is not. So, you take your pick of what you want to believe. Now, I'm not here to really cave in to the idea that JFK was not assassinated by a lone assassin. I'm not going to give my opinion on that because I just will not do it. Not for this. But I will say that there's a lot more in this film that leaves more questions than answers, but there's some that really do stick out and make you wonder what really happened. So, we'll start with, now basically the testimony given in this is a straight documentary. It's not a dramatization, unlike Oliver Stone's JFK film from 1991. This is actually really a straightforward documentary, using a lot of expertise from people who have done the research on these documents, who had questioned many of the witnesses, whether it's Alan Dulles or other people involved in the Warren Commission report, and so on and so forth, not to mention doctors and nurses, and what it is that they saw at the Parkland Hospital versus what was deemed to be, or what was generally accepted to be the actual truth. So the truth here veers, and we're never really sure what to think, and that's not unlike Oliver Stone's original film. But in this case, Oliver Stone feels, and we see footage of him at Dealey Plaza, and he basically says these are conspiracy facts. So I think he's trying to disassociate himself from QAnon and all those people who believe in wild things, much wilder than anything in this film. So, the one that got me was, first and foremost, the Lee Harvey Oswald backyard photos. So this is where he's holding a rifle, and this kind of basically in the public's eye made him the assassin, and proved the lone assassin theory as well. But there's dispute about the rifle in terms of the strap and not having a strap, and also the type of bullets that were fired. I am no expert in these things. I'm just addressing what it is that's mentioned. And also the wedding ring. Apparently there are two different types of photographs that clearly what they're basically implying is that they were doctored. And that the wedding ring appears to be in one hand versus the other. So it's not clear what, Now, I don't know if that proves a whole lot, but it's interesting. Because the original photograph was also deemed as a work of, photographic, some doctoring had occurred with this photograph. So, now we move on to other things. The magic bullet theory. So, according to the Warren Commission report, as I'm sure many of you know, Lee Harvey Oswald, they basically said, fired three shots, from the book depository building. The bullets caused 7 different wounds. So an entrance wound through JFK's neck, then the famous headshot, which seems to come from the front, but of course there's been a lot of dispute about that, which suggests that there was another shooter. But now, the magic bullet theory is ridiculous, so I will say that, even though I'm not really giving my opinion here. It makes no sense. It never did. It never will. I can't believe people actually back this up. Then there's the bullet that is ricocheted off of the curb near one individual that's standing by the bridge near the Dealey Plaza that kind of strikes his cheek. So somebody has to account for that bullet. Where did that come from? So that was a different shot. But the thing that really got me was the explanation about the pristine bullet that was found on the hospital bed. And it was found by, I think, a staffer. I can't remember who they said. But what they suggested was that the bullet had somehow, first of all, it was pristine. There was no indication that it fired through anything, any bones or anything like that. Keep in mind, Governor Connolly, who was sitting in front of John F. Kennedy and Jacqueline Kennedy, was struck in the wrist and then the leg and, all these things. So we know that happened, but somehow this bullet, a single bullet, mind you, had somehow passed through John F. Kennedy's body while he was on the hospital bed, all through his organs and through his back. And that was their explanation for this pristine bullet. That makes no sense. It just is not possible. So there's that. Now, the other thing is about the autopsy photos, which are quite graphic, and they were originally shown in the 1991 film. But the autopsy photos, according to the Parkland doctors and nurses, through actual recorded testimony, said that they are not what it is that they saw at Parkland Hospital. Because if you remember, his body was moved, and his brain was apparently missing. So they say that the actual autopsy photos have not been released to the public, and that they show what really happened. But the photos that were released to the public, they seem to have been doctored, as according to what these doctors and nurses have said, because there doesn't seem to be any wound in the back whatsoever. It looks like they covered it up with hair. I don't know if one can believe that or not, because since we don't see the original photos, we have to just kind of deduce that, well, all right, we're basing this on what they're saying. Whether it's true or not, hard to say for sure. But it is interesting. But here's the one that's the real kicker for me. Apparently, there were many threats made to John F. Kennedy in 1963, in the months leading up to his trip to Texas. He was going to make 2 different trips in a motorcade, in both cases. So in one, it was in Chicago, and the other one was going to be in Florida. So they uncovered 2 prior assassination plots in both states. Now, the one in Florida involved a guy named Lopez and 3 other Cubans who apparently had rifles with them, and 2 of which were, I believe one was Lopez, were found by the Secret Service. The other 2 disappeared. They were going to be at a hotel, which was a tall building, not unlike the Book Depository, in Texas. And they were going to fire. It was going to be sort of like a crossfire. Fire President Kennedy and kill him. The other one was in Chicago. And this was a guy named Thomas Arthur Valley, who apparently was an ex-Marine, just like Lee Harvey Oswald, and had also trained Cuban exiles, which apparently Lee Harvey Oswald at least seemingly did as well. He was not a Marxist-Leninist like Oswald, but nonetheless, this was the guy in Chicago. So what happened was, the Chicago trip was canceled. I think both of these were clearly canceled. But then they apprehended Thomas Arthur Valley. And what that suggests to me is that since they only mention his name, that he was sort of the lone wolf. So the question remains, which is never really followed up on, is, well, if you're making a connection with Lee Harvey Oswald, then you're suggesting, even though they don't say so, that Thomas Arthur Valley was the patsy. He would be the lone assassin. And on the other hand, that means others were going to be there to make sure the job was done, or what, just to frame him? It's never exactly clear. But Thomas Arthur Valley was going to have a job at a tall building that was overlooking this particular motorcade as well, not unlike the Book Depository. That, to me, was the most telling example of this film. It's something that really stuck out, and I said to myself, well, even if you don't believe there was a conspiracy in Texas when this assassination occurred, you have to say there's something going on here. This is actual stuff. These are records. I mean, it's not. Um, Now, once again, Oliver Stone suggests that John F. Kennedy didn't want war and was going to pull American troops out of Vietnam and didn't want to go to war with Cuba or anybody, didn't want to assassinate Castro, etc., etc., etc. And because of that, that's why they wanted to kill him. The CIA. Basically, he blames the CIA for this. Um, Not the mob, but definitely the CIA. So that's no different than what he had thought was the original conspiracy plot anyway in the 1991 film. But the thing is that John F. Kennedy had almost gone to war with Cuba. I mean, if you know about Robert McNamara, you'll know that McNamara in the Errol Morris documentary, which is fascinating, called The Fog of War, McNamara says that the public didn't know how close they really were to bombing with nuclear weapons Cuba. They were really close. And of course, Kennedy did not go through with it. But it does suggest to me that perhaps Kennedy would have gone to war at some point. We don't know for sure, had he lived, what was really going to happen. And as far as Vietnam was concerned, he felt in a famous Walter Cronkite interview, which was cut short a little bit in the 1991 film of JFK. It was shown in the opening montage of that film. And it's not revisited here, but I do remember that the original footage was JFK is basically saying to Cronkite, hey, it's their war, let them fight it, we shouldn't be there. But on the other hand, and this is the other extra step that was not shown in the film, he did say to Walter Cronkite, but maybe we should be there. Who knows? So I don't think he was completely against the idea of war if it was necessary and just. And so I'm not sure I believe that. Now, but, you know, I'm not a historian, and I'm sure others will see it differently. The film ends curiously with John F. Kennedy's views on race relations. It's a famous speech that he made where he really just wanted everybody to sort of get along, and that everybody should not be judged based on the color of their skin and so on and so forth. And I thought, well, why is he including that passage? And I think for Oliver Stone, Kennedy was a real national hero. But John F. Kennedy perhaps was not exactly the Prince of Peace that we all thought he was. We do know now that there were allegations, you know, behind closed doors of things happening with female staffers that worked for him and interns. So we know he wasn't 100%. But did he believe in peace? I don't know. I mean, maybe he did, but I guess he would have believed in war as a necessary and just thing if, you know, if it happened to be. But I found it interesting that it seemed to me as if the film was suggesting that even his view on race relations and making sure that everyone can sort of get along and that segregation be outlawed and this and that and the other, that somehow that also led to his assassination. I don't really buy that. I'm not really sure it's really being addressed that way, but it's possible. Nonetheless, if you like Oliver Stone, and I do, I like most of his films, JFK Revisited is fascinating. It's absorbing. Apparently there'll be a 4-hour version available at some point to either at the end of this month of February or some point then. And I definitely look forward to seeing that. I think it's there's more to be said here, and there's enough here to suggest that it's not that Oswald may not have been the lone assassin. Whether you believe it or not is not the issue, it's the evidence. And a lot of this is quite something. And there's a lot more that was discussed. But definitely check out JFK Revisited Through the Looking Glass. It's streaming now on Showtime. I guess you can also record it on your DVR. But it's definitely worth seeing. It's just a little less than 2 hours long. And it's fascinating, but whether you agree with it or not, you can't say it's boring, because it's not. And those are my views on